Esplanade, and welcome to our program this evening entitled the Metropolitan Festival Orchestra Panel Discussion. We're here to discuss and share with you on how and why the MFO was formed, and the projects in the pipeline, and the significance of the MFO's formation in the evolution of the local music scene. But before we begin, I would just like to introduce to you the panel over here of fine young gentlemen. Okay, to my right is Professor Tze Law. Now, today he is wearing the hat of the music director of the MFO. I will introduce him in greater depth later on. And on his right is Mr. Low Jia Hua. He is the general manager of the MFO. On my left, this very young gentleman here, both a doctor and a professor, Eugene Dairianathan. Right now he's the associate professor, music coordinator in the Visual and Performing Arts Academic Group at NIE NTU. And of course, the young gentleman on my far left is Mr. Albert Tay, artistic director of the International Festival Chorus, IFC. So a lot of big names, a lot of long names, so you have to bear with me because I'm going to use a little bit of the acronyms like any Singaporeans in Singapore. Oh, by the way, I'm Jeremiah Choy, and I'm the moderator for this evening. Thank you. The format of this discussion this evening will be that I will introduce each gentleman, and they will share a little bit about what their roles are with respect to MFO, and we'll then take questions from the floor after they've all spoken. So, before I start, I'd like to just introduce very shortly what is the Metropolitan Festival Orchestra, or MFO for short. Well, it's Singapore's first fully independent professional symphony orchestra. And as an orchestra, it aims to bring a fresh perspective to the orchestra music scene in Singapore with novel and innovative concert program. And if you were to look behind me, I think there are two very exciting programs that's going to come out in June, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. And they would like to bring together the best Singaporean and locally based professionally trained classical musicians under a new banner. The MFO presents its inaugural season this year, and it aims to establish itself as the most exciting and versatile symphony orchestra in Singapore, and I add this myself, in the region, okay? And of course, the world subsequently, okay? World dominance is what we aim for. It's not what they say, but I'm adding it on, okay? Of course, the MFO is led by its founding music director, and I testify to this, one of Singapore's most successful conductors, Professor Tze Law, and now I'd like to lead you to him in the sense of the discussion. And Professor Chan is an associate director of the Yong Siew Toh Conservatory of Music at US. And since his conducting debut with the SSO in 2001, he has conducted extensively in the Asia-Pacific region, working with orchestras such as China's Xiamen Philharmonic, Zhejiang Symphony, Shanghai Philharmonic, Shenzhen Symphony, and Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh Ballet and just let me flip over. Symphony Orchestra. Prof. Chan is widely recognized for his pivotal role in the continuing success of several Singapore orchestras, such as the Yong Siew Toh Conservatory Orchestra, the Singapore Festival Orchestra, the Orchestra of the Music Makers, and now MFO, to name a few. Alright, so Prof. Chan, can you share with us the reason for the formation of the MFO and the vision of MFO, and how is it different from the other orchestras in Singapore or the region?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that rather stellar introduction. I hope I live up to your text. Obviously, this is a momentous time, not only in the arts, but in Singapore's development as a nation. And if we look back at the last 40 years, there had been a number of orchestras that was formed. Around 40 years ago, the SSO was formed, and then the Singapore Chinese Orchestra was formed about 15 years ago or thereabouts. With the MFO, we have a different focus. And that focus is brought about by some of the current trends in art and entertainment. And you know, it's a fine line between art and entertainment. Where we can play a role is, I think, when the two come together. And that's quite obvious from some of the projects that we will undertake. I mean, the Metropolitan Festival Orchestra is clearly classically based symphony orchestra. However, over the last 50 to 100 years, creative people have found a lot more uses for a symphony orchestra than, say, for instance, Beethoven had. And of course, we're great fans of Beethoven as well. And we will do something by Beethoven. But it's quite interesting if you think about it. If you look at the two projects that we have coming up, one involves a rather well-known piano concerto by Beethoven. It's called The Emperor. And this one here has the Lord as part of its name. And so you can see that the orchestras tend to be involved in things that give the perception of space and of large entities. Now, a symphony orchestra is a large entity, there's no question about it. And the MFO is going to be a large entity. We're looking at 100 performers for the Lord of the Rings project. Why do we form it? Well, it seems like the modern day audience are increasingly finding the other things that orchestras do interesting, as well as the stuff that normally goes on in a concert hall. And if you look at the Lord of the Rings project, actually there are many more from where they come from. And we picked this one to let everybody have a little taste of what orchestras can do outside of the traditional concert hall environment. And for instance, I mean, we're selling more than 10,000 tickets for the Lord of the Rings. So you know, you don't normally associate that with a Beethoven performance. Although I certainly hope that one day we might be able to do that to a Beethoven performance as well. Now, there's another side to it as well, and that is that there is a growing, ever-growing pool of professionally trained musicians in Singapore. Many of them Singaporeans, many of them trained by institutions such as the one I'm at Yong Siew Toh Conservatory at the US, or at NAFA or other places. And so, in fact, we will have possibly some interesting viewpoints on that in a moment with my colleague here, Professor Eugene from NIE. Now, obviously when we train musicians, it would be a real pity if they don't get opportunities to perform. So the MFO is very much a platform for them to perform as well. And by bringing in international or world-class productions, they get to experience what you would normally see in major capital cities of the world. And perhaps we could think of it this way, that the Singapore art scene is broadening, is certainly developing, is definitely maturing, I think, to first world levels. And in combination, that's the reason why this is a good time to set up something like the MFO.
Thank you, Prof. We'll come back to you later. I'm sure you've got some questions for Professor Chan. Now, the next person I'd like to ask upon to share with us is Professor Eugene Dairianathan. He's currently the Associate Professor and Music Coordinator in the Visual and Performing Arts Academic Group at NTU. Now, Dr. Eugene is the very first PhD graduate in music to be awarded by NTU in Singapore. Although his initial training was in the specialization of music theory and analysis, his research interest has grown to encompass interdisciplinary perspectives of music. In 2002, he was a co-recipient of an NAC research grant, A Narrative History of Music in Singapore, 1819 to present. It's a long time to research on. He was also invited to contribute a book chapter towards the publication on musicianship in the 21st century. So therefore, Professor Eugene is definitely a very avid observer of the music scene in Singapore and very well positioned to share with us his objective views regarding the evolving orchestral landscape in Singapore and how they complement with each other and how MFO fits into this landscape. Dr. Eugene?
Okay. That was quite a mouthful. I hope I live up to everything that's been said about me. I'm going to start with Tze Law, and I think hereafter we're going to be first names. Too many mouthfuls and too many acronyms. Tze Law reminds me of a violinist I knew who had done, I remember listening to this recording when I was a child, probably a teenager, and later on discovering that this violinist ended up on one of the ensembles supporting the jazz practitioner Bob James in Volume 2. And then it made me realize, oh, okay, so what's a classically trained person doing all of the other repertoire, becoming backup string ensemble player in Bob James, you know? And then it made me realize that there are quite a number of people who have more than one sense of a musical practice. And so they can be the finest classical guitarists, but they can be really mean lead guitarists in another setting. And if that is the case, what exactly constitutes a musician? What sorts of skills should a person have? In fact, rather than having a musical skill, does that person possess particular dispositions which make them predisposed or indisposed to broadening out their musical horizons and their repertoire and their abilities? You know, and of course, today you've got Winston Marsalis and you've got a whole host of other people who are attempting to cross boundaries. And the longer you think about that, then you ask yourself, if these musicians are of varying ability, what constitutes an entity called an orchestra? Because an orchestra is something that we've come to accept of a sense in the formation and cementing almost about 200 years. The presence of an ensemble actually takes us all the way back. And you think of works by people in the band scene, for example, in the United Kingdom. You would have to go back to the Waits and town musicians who were there at least 300 to 400 years before. And these were musicians who kept time of day. They announced the arrival of people. They presented music all over society. They were, in a sense, 600 years ago, the broadcast media that any community had. And so if we look at the entity called the orchestra today, do we have the same sociological meaning? Do we have the same cultural meaning attached to these entities? Then one asks, and of course, you know, critics of today's setting will be saying, well, there's Beethoven, and there's the Lord of the Rings, you know. And it's a shame, because if anyone wanted to listen to orchestrations of, well, I'm an avid Transformer fan. And so when you do listen to Transformers Prime, you look at the ways in which orchestral forces are being used in such ways to invite a closer examination, a closer listening, and great respect for the way in which the sound is crafted towards supporting something as, I don't know, base level, popular culture, populist culture, as Transformers Prime, Ben 10, and you can think of a whole host of many others, and you know that orchestras have also been involved in Final Fantasy. And then you ask yourself, what exactly constitutes the repertoire? And in repertoire, and I use a term here in visual art, curatorial practice of the way in which that repertoire is used as source and resource. Now, within the Singapore context, there have been a huge number of ensembles, informal ensembles, many of them native infantry bands comprising people from India. And that goes back as early as 1819 from the Register of St. Andrew's Cathedral. And you would find that in some orchestral settings of Mendelssohn, the King's Regiment offered their wind ensemble to complement whatever other resources there were available. And this was common practice in the 19th century in Singapore. And now when you look at the constitution of the MFO today, should you be surprised that they comprise people from many different specialties and many different dispositions. Hold it there.
Okay, and we'll come back to you about the landscape. We take questions on that. So from an observer to a collaborator, we move on to, okay, for the last time I'm going to say Mr. Albert Tay. Albert has served as the artistic director of the International Festival Chorus, the IFC, since 2009. However, since 2001, Albert has been very actively working with school choirs in Singapore, and he has taught choral conducting at the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts and has given workshops locally and overseas. Now he's a teacher of teachers, the music teachers at the Singapore Teachers Academy. And as an educator, Albert believes in cultivating sound values and fine characters in his choristers, in a significant part of his work. As a result, choirs under his care has blossomed and received excellent reviews, top prizes, and gold awards in choral festivals and competitions both in Singapore and internationally. The International Festival Chorus, the IFC, will also be collaborating with the MFO in the movie concert event of the year, as you can see right behind me, The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring in June this year, and more about that later. So, Albert, could you tell us a little bit more about the collaboration between MFO and IFC, the synergy and the working relationship, and also in your view, what sort of role does the MFO play in the orchestral landscape in Singapore?
Firstly, thank you, Jeremiah, for the very overwhelming introduction. Basically, we just do what we do, and we try to do it well. Firstly, IFC is actually a non-auditioned choir where we accept people from all walks of life. But it doesn't mean that we're a lousy choir, for the record, because we do have people who are singing choirs for the first time, both locals and expatriates. We also have people who are soon to be PhD in musicology, and other people who are actually having bachelor's or master's in music performance as well, singing in the choir. So in relation to that, what IFC does the philosophy is music for everyone. And in this aspect, what MFO did for IFC is huge and significant, because in Singapore locally, not many people will have that opportunity to sing in a choir with a full-sized, professional, high-level symphony orchestra. And MFO fills this gap. And I think for amateurs and enthusiasts, to the people who are very serious and well trained in music, MFO really plays a huge part in filling this gap for people.
Thank you, Albert. Now, last but not least, of course, this other young gentleman on my right is Low Jia Hua. He is the general manager of the MFO, and he's also the co-founder. Jia Hua is a pioneer graduate of Yong Siew Toh Conservatory of Music, and he was appointed the founding orchestra manager of the Singapore Festival Orchestra by the Singapore Arts Festival. And this was while he was still in his final year at the conservatory. And upon graduation, he was quickly grabbed by NAC, to work as a full-time person at NAC, handling areas of work in grants, administration, and music industry development. He left the council in 2010 to go back to his roots as a trumpet player, as well as working as a freelance arts administrator, consultant, music lecturer, arts educator, and music copywriter. But now he's the GM of MFO, and he works very closely with the executive producer of MFO, Mr. Dr. Kevin Ko over that side, and of course on here, Prof. Chan, in the overseeing of all the operations of MFO staffs and activities and musicians as well. So I'd just like Jia Hua to quickly fill up, tell us about what's so different about the MFO in relation to the rest of the orchestra, because I understand it's the first full-time professional orchestra in Singapore.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremiah. Well, just a quick correction. But we are not actually full time, but we are fully independent. So we are not under the affiliation of any government body or private body. We are basically our own private company. And so I think the question would be, so who are the musicians of the MFO? And the answer is that we pull our musicians together from the entire scene. But they're all professionally trained musicians, whether they're local. By and large, they're all Singaporeans. In fact, we also do pull in musicians, Singaporean musicians who are actually working abroad, and we ask them to come back to play with us for our projects. So it's essentially an orchestra that brings together the best of the freelance professional musicians in Singapore.
Okay, great. So we pause here very quickly so that we can take some questions from you. Is there any particular questions that you'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
Your basic repertoire is like the standard repertoire. Are you going to play some kind of...
My question is because all of us, I believe, we go to the SSO concert very often, also the Yong Siew Toh Orchestra. So, what are your specialty? Are you going to play some of the different repertoire, the different genre of music, like the Lord of the Ring, or even SSO? They play the Blue Ocean by Joshua Tan.
Okay, would you like to take it?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Well, you know, if you look at what we're doing this season with the Beethoven and the Howard Shore Lord of the Rings, there is some distance between Beethoven and Howard Shore. We intend to explore even greater distances. For me personally, I've always held the principle that there really only are two types of music, good and bad. And as long as we can find something that we feel is worthwhile to do, we'll give the musicians great reward in participating in it, and that it would be appealing to the audience, we would certainly consider it. There are a lot of major productions out there like this, and like the Blue Planet that you mentioned and some of the others. And certainly we would be exploring many of those. So the real answer to your question actually is to watch this space.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions so far? Maybe I can have a question for Eugene. You know, there are several orchestras right now in the orchestral landscape in Singapore. Do you think it's congested, and do you think there's space for yet another orchestra?
Well, again, here the question is what each orchestra is doing. And if you have a symphony orchestra that's dedicated, if you like, to a certain curatorial practice determined by its season and certain obligations and certain commitments, then you may find yourself with a number of ensembles doing things separately and determined, if you like, by agenda set before them. Now, it would be wonderful if one could have available in the soundscape rather than the landscape an ensemble that could dare to cross borders, cross boundaries, bring music that lives today, bring music that continues to live today, like Beethoven, and perhaps give off opportunities for musicians and artists to collaborate. And of course, an ensemble like this also invites other possibilities. Might there be interdisciplinary connections? Might there be artistic collaborations with soundscapes? Might there be theatre productions that go along with these soundscapes?
Sure. I definitely think there's definitely more space for in the music scene in Singapore to grow, and having an orchestra like the MFO would therefore fill the void. Maybe I should just take this moment to quickly get Jia Hua to do a quick introduction of the first concert they're going to have, the majestic piano. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, these two concerts actually took concerts back to back in June, so we view it actually as our inaugural season. These are our first public performances, but actually we've actually had some closed door performances that were for some private clients. And this first, the Majestic Piano, we were actually asked to help to put together this concert by the Chris Foundation, which was founded by Mrs. Chris Tan, and she has particular interest in promoting and nurturing the growth of young musicians. The foundation itself was set up in 2011, and last year she organized a series of three concerts, three small recitals in the Esplanade Recital Studio that featured Japanese pianist Miyuki Washimiya. And so, based on that relationship that was established last year, she wanted to again feature Miyuki in a different orchestral in a different setting with an orchestra, and that's where we came into the picture. So she was looking for an orchestra that was able to perform with Miyuki at a professional level, and also, but at the same time, provide new opportunities for young musicians. So young professional musicians in Singapore, which is basically large. The average age of the Metropolitan Festival Orchestra, I don't know, but it is by and large, these are the young. We have a lot of younger musicians. Obviously, we have a number of experienced musicians as well. And I think that the youthful element was very important for Chris when we were in discussions with her about put together the program. So that's the first concert that we're having, and the week after, on 6, 7, 8 June, would be the Lord of the Rings. This is quite a different kind of project. These kind of projects have been around for a few years, very popular in America and Europe, and recently in Australia as well, but it's never been done in Singapore on such a large scale. We've had orchestral performance where we performed the soundtrack to a silent movie, that kind of performances, but the Lord of the Rings is the first time that we actually in Southeast Asia that we have the actual full screening of the movie. So it's not just a soundtrack. You actually watch the movie on the large cinema-sized screen, and you have 250 musicians performing the soundtrack. So you still get to hear the audio as well, the dialogue or the sound effects, but these are balanced with the live performance of the soundtrack. So it's actually quite an exciting concept, and actually we hope to do more of these kind of projects, because obviously this is the first movie, this is a trilogy. So we're looking at subsequent years to bring in the other shows as well.
Thank you. And for those of you who are interested in the first concert, that is the Majestic Piano, it is on the 1st of June at 7:30. It's 1 hour and 40 minutes with an interval of 20 minutes. It's at the SOTA Concert Hall, and tickets are $22, and you can get it at Sistek. And if you don't know where Sistek is, there's one downstairs. Grab the tickets. Okay, any other questions before I pose another question to Albert?